Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving us your time today. I'm Ian Hamilton in New York, joined by David Heaney from London, broadcasting this episode of VR Download today. It is April 16th, 2024, and I'm wearing a Quest 3. We're live on YouTube with audience interaction and on replay across every podcast platform. We're here to talk about the rise of virtual reality, and you can support our work directly with membership at UploadVR.com. David, what do we have today?
So we have 6 topics we're going to discuss today. First, we'll discuss the Wolvic XR web browser, which is the successor to Firefox Reality. It's an open source web browser, switching to Chromium to close the performance gap with the MetaQuest browser. And we'll talk about the advantages it has and the importance of having an open source alternative there. We'll then talk about Niantic's 8th wall web-based AR engine, adding support for Vision Pro, but with a major caveat. We'll talk about the Quest setting that significantly improves boundary recall. It was added back in December, but Meta has recently explained clearly the benefits of it. We'll then talk about the release of OpenXR 1.1, the Open Industry Standard API. Version 1.1 was released yesterday. And then we'll talk about Palmer Luckey and John Carmack arguing with Meta's CTO on X, formerly Twitter, about Luckey's firing, one of the most pivotal events in the history of VR. Finally, we'll talk about Pimax announcing 2 new wired PC VR headsets, the $700 Pimax Crystal Lite and the $1,800 Pimax Crystal Super, and what that might mean for the PC VR hardware space. To answer Tatara's questions, we are not using external microphones this episode. We've been really busy and haven't had a chance to test that yet. So I saw someone in the comments earlier said that Ian told them that we're going to use spatial personas this week. That's not true at all. We never said that. That's completely misinformation.
Yeah, that's not true. I did, however, while I was waiting for the studio to come back, I did put on my Apple Vision Pro, and then I put on the Quest 3 on top of my Apple Vision Pro. And I'm not doing that now. I'm not doing that now, but I did do it to see what that would look like, and it worked. That was unusual. So yeah, we don't know when we're going to get you into the studio just yet, but I did enjoy your Studio 2 headsets deep today. Interesting subjects today, and I'm very curious to discuss this with our audience, see what they thought of all the back and forth they saw on Twitter over the weekend. Curious if we'll end up with Blair in our comments, instigating some of that with his own commentary. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting discussion as we get there. You want to get right into that first subject?
Sure, and Harry Underwood's asked, we'll be talking about the undocumented plane scanning feature in V64. We'll be putting up an article on that later today, so then we'll discuss it next week. It's very interesting stuff, but we don't have it out yet, so we'll be discussing that next week. Let's start by talking about Wolvic, though. If you're not familiar with it, as I just said, it is the open source successor to Firefox Reality, which was the port of Firefox for standalone headsets like the original Oculus Go, the original Oculus Quest, and the HoloLens 2. And today, Wolvic is on Quest, Pico, Magic Leap 2, and Huawei VR glasses in China. So the story here, the background was that back in 2020, Mozilla laid off 250 employees, including staff that were working on Firefox Reality. It was then no longer at all a prioritized project. And in 2022, 2 years ago, they handed it over to an open source software group called Agalia, which relaunched it as Wolvic. So the advantage of Wolvic is that because it's based on that Firefox original, it still has Firefox Sync. So you can set up sync between Firefox on your phone, your computer, and your headset. And so you can browse the web without having to re-enter all your passwords and bookmarks, which is the real advantage of this over the Quest browser. But until now, the major disadvantage was performance, because being based on Firefox, it was using the Gecko engine, Mozilla's browser engine. And especially when it comes to WebGL, which is basically the version of OpenGL that runs in web browsers, that 3D performance in Gecko is just a lot worse compared to Chromium. And so Agalia have decided now to slowly transition from the Gecko engine, the Firefox browser engine, to Chromium, the browser engine that powers Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and the MetaQuest browser. And they find that when it comes to 3D applications with WebGL, including WebXR, which is a major use case of a browser in a standalone headset, the performance is triple. They're seeing like a tripling of frame rate. And that's why they decided to make this decision, even though their roots come from Firefox's Gecko engine. They very much so would have preferred to support the more open option, but at this point they're saying this browser simply could not be a competitive WebXR browser without Chromium. So right now, this is available to sideload, the Chromium version of Wolvic, and they still do have Gecko versions. They still intend to support both engines, but over time they will be deprioritizing the Gecko engines and versions and prioritizing the Chromium versions, and soon the App Store versions, so the Quest Store, the Pico Store, the Magic Leap 2 Store, will be transitioned over to Chromium.
Yeah, going to be a big day when we sort of see more standardization across WebXR, but also options at the same time. That's the push and the pull that we have when it comes to browsers. Some of the most interesting things happening in VR are in WebXR experiences, but cross-platform support is constantly the promise there. That is always we've got new interaction paradigms with eye tracked. Sort of pinches, as well as just completely different hardware that all of these uh, windows need to run on basically now as worlds. So we'll be curious to see how this develops over the next few generations. But performance is one of the things you can't really do without, right?
Yeah, and it's very important to have this open source alternative, because not only does it mean that people aren't forced to use the MetaQuest browser if they have a Quest, it also means that Magic Leap doesn't have to go out and develop their own XR web browser. HTC doesn't have to develop their own. Pico does have their own, but from the Pico users I've spoken to and myself using my Pico 4, you prefer to use Wolvic for those advantages. Because even on Quest, I'll reiterate, the biggest disadvantage of the Quest browser is it is completely detached from your other devices, right? And it's one of the huge things that people love about Vision Pro, that you open Safari on Vision Pro and you've got your bookmarks, your passwords, your tabs from your iPhone, from your Mac, all of that synchronization. With this, it gives you the option. And yeah, it's great for both for synchronization with Firefox and for support for as many headsets as possible.
Yeah, people I think are asking about Netflix. They're wondering about running Netflix through various browser options. You've got lots of challenges when you try to run DRM'd content through various browser options that you want. That's one big sort of thing in the way of getting that stuff up and running. The um the
Yeah,
thing that I
Netflix.
was testing. Sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say Netflix seems to do a thing where they manually approve each device and browser type, so that's more on Netflix's side than a specific browser. But go ahead.
Yeah, I just mentioned the user agent, and the thing that I was playing with over on the Apple Vision Pro browser was trying to figure out whether there were any apps that would wrap a browser window as a basically home screen app, so that it would function as a full screen window, basically to hack it together so I could see what Horizon worlds look like in a flat screen window, same as Rec Room and same as I've got VR chat ready to go. But I couldn't quite get that, and it's sort of a similar issue where there are apps that have browser settings for you to mess with the user agent and things like that. But it's quite different when you've got WebXR in the mix here on this engine.
Yeah, I guess the one downside here that some people would point out is that we're going to get a less diversity of browser engines. This is obviously something much wider than just in the AR VR space. There is this issue where every web browser today is just using Chromium, except for, of course, Apple's Safari, which uses Apple's WebKit. And Gecko was kind of that third option, the more open option. And the problem is now, if everything uses Chromium and WebKit, then Apple and Google dictate how the web works, and they dictate which features are supported. Yes, there is the Web Standards Agency, but they only set the spec. When it actually comes to what features are prioritized, how do they work, how the permissions getting worked, Apple and Google now have that full control over the web in many ways. And, Mozilla with Firefox and their Gecko engine were always that third option, trying to be directly spec compliant and not take these opinionated views. But, Google's been criticized in the past when it comes to Chromium prioritizing things that matter for advertisers and prioritizing ways to make ad blocking less convenient, for example. And obviously, then on Apple's side, they have been criticized for prioritizing features that make native App Store apps work better and don't let web apps catch up either as soon or ever with certain features. So you can see the importance of the Gecko engine, but the problem is Mozilla just haven't put the investment in to get it to have the same feature set and the same performance. And Wolvic, as well as performance, are saying that this is going to allow them to add support for hand tracking in WebXR and WebXR's augmented reality module, which we'll talk about in our next story when it comes to Apple supporting
Yeah, I
that
want to say
or
hello
not.
to our regular viewers, lots of members tuning in, and we always love seeing where they're tuning in from all across the world and in VR. We, of course, do want to meet and see our audience in VR over time, and we will get there. It's a matter of just doing it at the right steps. Um, I was thinking about James O'Laughlin here. I see in the comments. Can I talk about what happened over the weekend with our persona call? That was the first time I've ever experienced that particular thing with that persona call, but I'm going to ask James to tell whether I can share that. Okay, yeah, I've got his permission. So, um, we'll get to that when we get to the section in two stories when we talk about this big conversation that happened on Twitter over the weekend. But I want to share that and tease that. It was really fun. Also, want to ask people to share this link out to others who might be curious about VR, getting into it for the first time, wanting to know what the heck these avatars are all about. Right? We're kind of where we try to be platform agnostic as much as we can. It's very difficult when you've got brand new tools and have to choose what your time is. But that's what we are. We're trying to be platform agnostic, and that means talking about literally the things that we're wearing sometimes. So we can help explain that to anyone you've got curious in your sort of area on the other networks. Bring them over here and invite them for the conversation. Let's talk about that next subject here, David.
Sure. So Eighth Wall was and is a web-based AR engine, as in it's similar to Unity, which lets you obviously build games and apps for non-VR platforms and VR platforms of all kinds. This is a more focused, targeted engine that runs entirely in the browser. So the editor is in the browser, the apps run in the browser, they're deployed to a cloud. It's called Eighth Wall. Niantic acquired it. Niantic, of course, being the company behind Pokemon Go and other mobile games like that. So recently they have been adding support for headsets as well as just mobile based AR, and the news now is that they've finally added support for Vision Pro, because we talked a few weeks ago about the Eighth Wall apps that support crossplay between smartphones and Quest 3, and we noted that when we tried that in Vision Pro it didn't work. The problem is that Vision Pro does support WebXR, yes, but it doesn't support WebXR's AR module. The irony is that Vision Pro can only do VR in the web. Web developers can show VR experiences on Vision Pro. They can't do AR experiences. If you want to build an AR experience for Vision Pro, it has to be through the App Store, a native app, not through the web. So you may ask then, how can a web-based AR engine add support for Vision Pro? And the answer is what you might expect. They make it easy for developers to have a virtual background. So this is a really strange situation given that Vision Pro is so focused on AR. People would generally say, Vision Pro is AR first, Quest 3 is VR first. And this situation is a kind of funny situation where it's the opposite. So a developer builds on Eighth Wall a basketball game, and on your phone, it will show up in AR. On a MetaQuest headset, it will show up in AR, but on Vision Pro, to support it, they have to specify a virtual background that takes the place. So you go into your Vision Pro, you load this up in Safari, and you see a virtual world. But anyone who loaded that up in the MetaQuest browser would see AR, and of course on the phone. And that the point of this app, the point of this platform is to allow developers to easily deploy these apps that do run across multiple platforms. But in many ways, Niantic is learning that because of what each headset maker allows and doesn't allow, they have to, that dream of write once, deploy anywhere, and work the same simply can't work yet. Again, I just think this is so almost funny because of how focused on pass-through Vision Pro is and how focused on VR Quest primarily has been.
It's a really difficult area to talk about. I was reading your breakdown of this and trying to struggle with some of the language here on how the platform chooses to view the content, how the person is viewing the content, how it gets shown differently on different platforms and gets labeled something else. It's not an easy thing. Uh, it's not gonna go away anytime soon. We're gonna have to keep struggling against the platforms describing this stuff differently. The fact that it works at all is progress, I suppose. When I first opened some of those WebXR apps, it would only seem to recognize the camera as the weird persona cam, right? This is a step further, like better than that.
Yeah, it is actually funny you say that because 8th Wall does also allow you to build um, selfie cam AR experiences of the kind you would have in Snapchat and Instagram. You can build those for the web. And this does actually work on Vision Pro, except as you say, it will be your persona. So that aspect works. The one camera they can get as developers in 8th Wall from Vision Pro is this virtual camera. And apologies to our viewers, you wouldn't have seen this image until about 5 seconds ago when I got it casted up. We were able to see it before, but this image on screen gives you a visual example of what we were talking about and what I was pointing to before.
Yeah, James will often. It's all mixed reality, virtual reality, as far as I'm concerned, mostly. But we'll get into that later. Let's see. This next one. I want to get into. Is there anything else more on this one that we should talk about? I think. Yeah. Is
I don't think
WebEx?
so. I
It's
guess
as
the one
similar
last
as.
thing I would
Yeah.
point
Sorry. Go
out
ahead.
from, sorry, I think you cut off for a second there. I may have spoken over you by accident. The only last thing I was going to say was just the other thing that WebXR doesn't have on either of these headsets is shared spatial anchors, and that was the thing we talked about before when it comes to crossplay. You can't build same space multiplayer experiences without requiring a manual calibration. WebXR is advancing all the time. Every year, we talk about all of the new things you can do in WebXR and the improvements, but there is still a long way to go. There are still performance issues, and we've talked about before how web GPU, the equivalent of Vulkan for the web, is going to come along pretty soon to potentially sort that out. Obviously, it's already released as a spec, but not all browsers properly support it yet. Payment is a huge issue. The MetaQuest browser doesn't have like an Apple Pay or Google Pay style system that you can easily pay for content. Vision Pro does, but on Quest, you would have to get the person to manually enter their card details, which is just awkward. And then yeah, you have these API issues that Apple doesn't let you get passed through. Quest doesn't let you do spatial anchor or shared spatial anchors yet. So WebXR has a promising future, but it's still in its very, very early days. Is the last thing I would say about this topic.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to our next subject here. This is the setting that everyone should activate on their Quest. David, you why don't you break this down for us?
Yeah, so back in December in the V60 update for Quest, Meta released this new feature that uses cloud computing capabilities to better remember your play space. So one of the most annoying things if you own a Quest is that you want to go play a game with a friend or alone, you put it on and you're ready to play, and instead of remembering that boundary that you drew out, it says boundary not found, and you have to draw it out again. That's something that was a major issue with earlier headsets. With Quest 3, it's better and better. And that's why Meta introduced this feature that instead of being limited to using the headset's onboard processing capabilities to do that point cloud matching and figure out, is this a space I've been in before? You can now offload that to Meta's servers, and they'll use obviously powerful server-side GPUs to do a more advanced algorithm and figure it out. And so Meta, obviously, as I said, released this feature in V60. It is optional because you are opting in to allow the 3D point cloud, a collection of 3D coordinates in your room that represent its uniqueness, to be sent off to Meta servers to be processed. And if you have an issue with that from a privacy perspective, you're going to want to keep this turned off. This is the same feature that powers shared spatial anchors though. So for it to be possible for you to play same space multiplayer, multiple quests in the same space, seeing the same objects in the same place, this same setting has to go on, because that point cloud matching is also done in Meta servers. This is all the same kind of algorithm, figuring out a point cloud, aligning, matching, recognizing. So Meta is this week now branding this as VPS, Visual Positioning System, and they've released some interesting claims about how effective this has been over the past 4 months. They are saying that within 4 months, it has helped Quest users get into their apps faster more than 100 million times, and that this VPS, with other tracking improvements made over the past 4 months, have reduced these boundary not found errors by 50%. So that's a dramatic improvement to one of the biggest sources of friction, but you have to opt into this feature. It's not happening on your headset, it's happening on Meta's servers.
And I guess those stats are powerful evidence that Meta will use to make these pop-ups even smoother for you to accept, trying to get more people to get those benefits of those sort of remembering your space things. Um, is there anything else we want to talk about on this specific subject? Because this is an important one. It's part of a process Meta has had to go toward, where they're getting people to be more comfortable with them sharing information. The examples I bring up in the past is, of course, the now dead Portal devices had physical shutters that could slide over the camera systems. Early in the days of Oculus, they had the Constellation Oculus sensors, and there was quite a bit of debate over whether to call those sensors or to just call them cameras, because ultimately they didn't present themselves as cameras to a computer, but they were cameras underneath, just seeing in certain wavelengths. But that's essentially the type of situation we have here from then to now, is Meta getting more comfortable with their users sharing this information with them.
Yeah, I think you're seeing this across Google as well. On the new Pixel 8 Pro, there are certain features that you can use to enhance the videos you take that are being done on Google servers. So the video gets sent to Google server, the processing happens there, and then it comes back to your phone. This is just an example of, yes, these devices are using on-device AI for a lot of things, including the tracking and image segmentation, things like that. But there's always going to be a limit to what you can do on device. And then you have to have this trade-off between privacy in the esoteric sense of, this is something no longer happening on your device. It's being sent over a network, and functionality. And it does open up that debate of where along the line of, full imagery to point cloud, does it become something that you consider private information? Is your movement private information if it's just talking about a set of coordinates? Is a point cloud that you could maybe use to reconstruct the basic structure of your room? If you looked at this point cloud, you could probably tell, you have a door there and a window there and a table there, because we've seen Scene Script is essentially using that point cloud to reverse figure out what is going on in this room, what is the room's configuration. Do you care if Meta servers know that you've got a table in this place and that your room's this wide and this, it becomes down to a kind of personal issue of where you draw the line of what you're comfortable with a company's servers having stored information about your home. But to be clear, this is not imagery. There's no actual camera imagery involved here.
Yeah, this is, of course, kind of like what you're describing is, I don't know, the next decade of cookie discussion is going to be exactly what's contained within this, what can be backwards engineered from it, and exactly how it runs on all of our systems. But that's a discussion we will have to get into deeper another day. I don't think we can touch too more on it right now.
Yeah. The last thing I would say is there's a few commenters, Shaps here. It says point clouds can get extremely detailed, and that is very, very true. You can have a point cloud that is, really dense and gives a lot of geometry. This point cloud is not really that dense. This is a few hundred points per room. This is not, you don't need something that dense to recognize a room, believe it or not. The set of unique features, unique high contrast areas in a 3D space that are needed to recognize it uniquely from another space given a lot of computational power server side, is actually a lot lower than you might imagine. This is nothing of the kind that you could reconstruct, like, where is there a mug on a table, or what kind of, exact shape of a circular object is. It's not like that at all, but it still is technically, personally identifiable data technically.
Yeah, like, the example I think of a lot was LaserDance, having to develop LaserDance in tandem with a list of testers has meant that LaserDance has gotten access to a range of room sizes in order to make sure that their lasers span out and build a passable course no matter the shape and size of your room. And that is deeply personal data if you don't handle it the right way, or you don't necessarily inform everyone that they're doing what they're doing. They if it's not communicated that your room is going over to servers, that could upset a few people in a few places.
Yeah, I think we can probably move on from this topic now, unless we have anything else we want to discuss on it.
Yeah, I think the commenters are sort of doing what we do in our heads about this subject, right? It's really hard not to picture Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg in your room watching you when you've got cameras on from these systems. It's the Mark Zuckerberg in the room. It's the 500 the elephant in the room. It's creepy, it's obvious, and it's not going away anytime soon. This sense that these devices are watching us at all times. It's also fair to point out that Apple, by and large, gets a free pass by a lot of people because of their stance on privacy at like a corporate level, and that's not necessarily fair. They don't necessarily like we need to give them the same level of scrutiny that we give Meta on this subject because of having so many personal devices in our home.
Yeah, Shap is making a good point here. They're saying they wish it was more transparent about what exactly you're uploading. You could have access to the same copy of that data. That's a really fascinating idea, because I kind of agree with you. If you aren't someone who keeps up with this technology and you just see, this makes my headset work better, it's share point cloud data, you wouldn't know that this is a very sparse point cloud. You could think, is this actually like a really detailed 3D construction? It'd be very interesting if you could kind of click on this and see an actual, miniature 3D version of that point cloud in your room and see, okay, this is exactly what I'm sending to these servers. That's a great point about data transparency. People are obviously much more comfortable sending data where they know exactly what's being sent than something that isn't. But if you're using Google Photos or iCloud, you're literally sharing intimate photos of your entire family with Google servers or Apple servers. So there it's not like there isn't a precedent here for this. And when it comes to this thing about, people have this imagination of Mark Zuckerberg's watching them, I saw a study recently that said a huge percentage of people genuinely believe that Facebook and Google listen to their conversations constantly, as in that, these apps are running in the background and listen to their conversations. That's a myth that a lot of people believe. And
Yeah.
of course, there have been dozens of studies that have tried to find evidence of this, and none have been able to. They can do this down to the device level, as in an Android phone that has been specifically modified at the hardware level to show when is the microphone being accessed, how is it being accessed, literally rooted devices that are logging directly which app is getting which packet from the microphone. There's no evidence that any of these apps are actually doing that, and yet people continue to use them. That's the really interesting thing to me. People genuinely believe this, and yet they still use their phone. So
Well, yep. Yeah, I mean, it's like they built the railroads, we've gotta use them, and we can complain about the prices to get on the railroads, but we still gotta use the railroads, to get where we're going, sort of thing. I think we can move on, to talk about this OpenXR feature. So OpenXR 1.1 is a big moment for the industry to see adopted. 1.0 came out several years ago, and it is a massive effort that we all need to know about, pay attention to, with the partners who aren't participating in OpenXR becoming increasingly problematic over time. I guess I'll phrase it that way. David, am I right in all that? Why don't you break this down?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So, Meta is involved in OpenXR, Pico's involved, Vario, Valve, Microsoft, NVIDIA, AMD, everyone you could possibly think of except for Apple. Apple is the big name that has never been involved in OpenXR. There is no evidence that Apple has ever even tried to be involved in OpenXR. On Apple's platform, you use ARKit and RealityKit, Apple's own APIs, while the rest of the industry is standardizing around this OpenXR. And in recent years, OpenXR has gone from something that barely works on Quest, and then it was at the point where it worked, but hand tracking didn't work. To now, these days, as of 2024, and even last year and the year before, it is the default and only supported way to build apps for all of these platforms. All of these companies, except for Apple, have standardized around this open industry standard, and you can't. There are no proprietary Oculus API versions anymore. It's all going through an OpenXR runtime. Same for Pico, same for HTC. All of these standalone headsets are running Android APKs that use the OpenXR API to interface with the headset's runtime. And yeah, OpenXR 1.0 actually released all the way back in 2019. So 1.1 has been a long time coming. And the main headline thing they've done here is that they have merged some key extensions into the core spec. So with OpenXR 1.0, there were a lot of things that companies wanted to do that weren't inside the spec, so they were able to build extensions. That's how the spec is designed, to allow it to be easily extensible. And one of those is foveated rendering, stereo with foveated rendering. And this was actually an extension on the PC side that was done by Vario's XR Vario Quad Views. You may have heard of that phrase, Quad Views, if you've used foveated rendering on PC through a Pimax headset or through Quest Pro with third-party tools. That is now being merged into the specs. So once you see Steam VR's OpenXR runtime adopt 1.1, and then you see versions of Unity start to adopt 1.1 in its OpenXR, you're going to over time see the situation where foveated rendering is going to be much more widely supported on PC, which we'll talk later about why that's important and how there are more headsets going to arrive that have eye tracking to support that. It also brings some more minor things into the spec. For example, it brings floor level tracking. So beforehand, there was only eye level tracking and stage tracking. And these three types have been supported in the proprietary Oculus SDK for a very long time now, since the release of Quest, but only these two were in OpenXR without extensions until now. This local tracking, it's called in OpenXR, and a lot of other previous runtimes it was called eye level tracking, is the situation where when you recenter, all three axes recenter. So the virtual floor moves up and down when you recenter, and this is very common in things like a cockpit game. You may want to sit at a different seating height than what you are virtually, and plenty of games use it even when they shouldn't, in my opinion. Stage level tracking is when recentering does nothing, right? The virtual origin is in the center of your play space on the floor, and content is placed relative to that. That's not used much in VR, but it's used very commonly in mixed reality to position things in your space so that when you recenter, nothing happens, right? You don't want to have the thing that was hanging on your wall or coming out of your window shift when you recenter. You don't want the concept of recentering to apply in that case. And so the one that OpenXR 1.1 has brought into the spec is this middle ground, local floor, also known as floor level tracking, where recentering will recenter you on the horizontal axis. So position everything in VR back into recenter you, but it won't affect the vertical axis. The floor will still stay locked to your real floor. There are a lot of other more minor things being added to the spec, including grip surface, a new pose that allows you to applications to reliably render a virtual object held in your hand, regardless of whether you're using hand tracking or track controllers. It also adds 13 new interaction profiles, so that's support for different kinds of controllers. It adds identifiers for thumb resting surfaces, styluses, trigger curl, so the ability to and trigger slide, the ability to roll your finger outside of a controller that has a capacitive surface on the index trigger. Proximity detection for controller elements. So touch controllers for a long while, as well as index controllers, can tell when your finger is hovering above a button. That's something that's now supported in OpenXR. And localized haptics, which is used in the Quest Pro controllers, for example, where you have those haptic motors that are underneath your thumb and underneath your index finger instead of just one haptic actuator. This is now all supported in the OpenXR spec. So these are things that beforehand companies could do with extensions, but it's now going to be standardized. A lot of minor stuff here, one major thing with the foveated rendering, but it all comes together. And pretty much every company involved in the spec has come out and said, we still support OpenXR. It's still what we want, and we plan to support 1.1 as soon as possible.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you know what the Hall effect is, David? Can you explain what it is to me? The drift issue that happens on controllers. Are you familiar with what causes that?
Yes. In reference to, I think we've all owned Switch Joy-Cons and had this happen.
Well, can the fact that you're tracking your hands be used to correct for that? Can you use the position of your fingers to adjust for faulty controllers? Is that a path that we could maybe see over time?
That's a fascinating idea. I've never thought about that before. When you have already on Quest 3 and on Vision Pro, if you're using Joy-Cons, you're already doing hand tracking and controller tracking at the same time. So as you say, if you were able to mark to the system, my thumbstick is broken, could you actually use the controller-free hand tracking to do the thumb? That would require some serious precision on the hand tracking level. But you can imagine that even being used to calibrate a dead zone, right? Imagine that you have say that you go into calibration for your controller and it says, point your controllers together and hold your thumb over them in a locked position. It could then kind of do a calibration there. That's a very, very interesting idea.
Yeah, well, it's part of the ongoing thing that I've got in my head when you talk about emulators and you think about them on an OLED screen that maybe even has some HDR in it with something like the PlayStation VR2 screen. When you start imagining these old games being reborn on new devices, you start imagining ways in which, like, all of our newfound abilities with VR can be used to enhance old experiences. And there's all sorts of things like that when you've got like an OLED screen, you actually giving developers a bigger canvas on which to replicate a wider range of old displays. And so, like, you could have potentially an experience that is closer to the way you remember it because you were given a better display system to begin with. And that's just one way in which, like, a controllers would be another way you could potentially enhance the experience overall. The Power Glove kind of opened my brain to that. I tried the Power Glove, glove in a WebXR experience, right? And all it is rotating back and forth, left and right to move a car racer on the screen over there. But like, I know the Power Glove was infamously bad as an input device. The fact that this works at all on the computer vision algorithms of 30 years later is a remarkable demonstration that you can actually enhance things, even though they're kind of stupid to begin with.
Yeah, there's definitely a push with WebXR and OpenXR to abstract away the control type and kind of build around hands. It's something we saw SteamVR do years ago when it comes to their skeletal input system. This idea of, am I going to get roasted for using that pronunciation again,
No,
even
it
though I
makes me
know
it
UK
makes me
people use it?
shiver. I shivered. I'm sure some people in our audience shivered. It's like ugh, skeletal. What? I don't know. All right. So tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm just imagining that, but
It's a valid UK pronunciation. I checked. Even if it does horrify the commenters, I'm going to keep using it. But yeah, to get back to the point, having that abstracted input system that thinks more about actions and hands and relative to, compared to just specific controllers is something that we're seeing happen across all of these APIs. And yeah, you're going to see a wide variety of input. There was kind of a time where input in VR universally meant a headset and two touch-like tracked controllers. And then with hand tracking on Quest, we saw that start to significantly diverge. And now on Apple Vision Pro, you have this completely abstracted concept of, eye tracking and hand tracking, but you're not getting either raw. You're getting this kind of pointer emitted from the hand in the direction that your eye is kind of looking. Um, yeah, so you can see these APIs are all kind of moving around to figure out how do we support that as a developer? How do you build something today that's going to still work with a new kind of input device in 3 years from now? That's been one of the toughest challenges with OpenXR is input. When it comes to the headset stuff, obviously there's difficult software engineering going on, but from a conceptual design perspective, it's it doesn't really matter. Between headsets, you're still just showing 2 images per eyes. Maybe some headsets have the displays pointed a different way. Maybe some of them have slightly different distortion profiles, but all of that can just be loaded in as data. When it comes to how do you support input, that's a much harder question, and one of the real struggles OpenXR is pushing forward and trying to solve.
Onikazi pointing out that skeletal is actually the elite way of saying skeletal. Very good point there. I'm ready to talk about this argument over the weekend, but anything else on this subject we should talk about first?
No, I think we can move on to this. This is going to be an interesting one. Very different from everything we talked about so far.
I'm refusing to read out the quotes since we did that with an article where we recapped everything that was said by these three people: John Carmack, Palmer Luckey, and Andrew Bosworth, the current CTO. So that would be the Bosworth being the current CTO of Meta, and then John Carmack being the Oculus CTO for a while before sort of becoming an advisor to Bosworth over the course of his tenure at Oculus, before, of course, Carmack went and quit and started a artificial general intelligence company, and Palmer Luckey started a defense company. So these are people who have been enriched significantly by their time at Meta, going off to do very different things, talking about their time at Meta and at Facebook. And it was pretty interesting. What I was out at the soccer field when I saw the beginning of this conversation start. Obviously, recapped that in my write up about it. And when did you first notice this conversation was ongoing, David?
Yeah, I think I saw you share it into Slack, and I thought, I thought at first you were just sharing it, and then I noticed you started it, you instigated it, you agitated it, and I thought, wow.
Okay, all right, fair. I did instigate a small amount of this conversation, but I'm gonna give credit to what Mark Andreessen would have been an early investor in Oculus. He kind of started off a conversation there that Carmack lopped onto and
Yeah,
added to himself. But
yeah,
then I decided to try to get a question answered that hasn't been answered for some time, and that question is whether Palmer Luckey's firing from Facebook was politically motivated or not. And that is a very, very hard answer to figure out, not for lack of trying to find the answer.
yeah. It's a huge question, and as far as I understand, U.S. law. Obviously, I'm not American. As far as I understand, the problem with that question is that if the answer was yes, it would technically be illegal. So even if the answer is yes, we're never going to get an admission from Meta, certainly, and even people connected to Meta are going to be pretty reluctant to say so. But it was very interesting to hear Carmack saying that he believes it was in response to hysterical internal employee pressure, but that he thinks Mark Zuckerberg did not have a strong personal view on it. And as far as I understand from what Andrew Bosworth was saying here, there is a very different culture at Meta today than there was back then. And they had this concept of bring your whole self to work, where they wanted employees to include their personal political views inside internal company discussions. And that went very well before the extreme polarization of the 2016 election. But obviously, around that time, when it came to this massively polarizing election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, this was a catastrophe when it came to cohesion inside the company. And today, as far as we understand it, and this was probably implemented a few years ago, Meta does the exact opposite. They say, do not talk about your personal politics inside the company because it's just not worth it and it causes massive conflict.
Yeah, some tough, difficult comments to go over in our comments here. Yeah, there was some coded language that I noticed people pointed out in Carmack's initial quotes that kind of rang hard, like he was speaking to specific crowds. Carmack's initial comment was that what Facebook would have been better off without certain people basically grabbing their pitchforks and trying to get rid of other people that they're are employed with. And then, of course, you would have other employees that really don't want to continue working with someone that they politically are opposed to. And that's just what, that leads to a policy where you don't talk about politics at work, right? Like that's was the initial sort of thing that a lot of businesses do to begin with, right? You don't talk about it in polite settings usually as just a social nicety, and then you also don't discuss those things at work. And that's true, but like that's true for most businesses. But Facebook and this whole self-to-work concept is it really when Carmack brings that up and talks about it, it really rings true and hurts even outside of Facebook. Um, to think about the merging of your personal life with your public life and the way that the role Facebook has played in erasing those barriers in various ways over the years, right? There have been countless stories over the years of Facebook choosing something for their engagement purposes that they decided was best for their user base because it served Facebook in the end to get more people, more eyeballs focused on them that ultimately blurred what is public, what is private. Remember, there's a long period there where Facebook was trying to get you to put every single detail of your entire timeline going back before you joined Facebook back into the timeline of Facebook. And now it's this like dead address book of information that people have left there to rot because they don't care to maintain it anymore. Um, it's it's difficult, David. Like this journey of what was Facebook's role in making us work from home to begin with, and what is that gonna be like in the next few years as they make our headsets?
Yeah, so I just want to point out a comment here. I have a comment from James Howe saying, it wasn't just his political view, though, was it? He was using his presumably Facebook money to fund meme trolling teams, allegedly. And I think this is one of those things that Palmer Luckey is still very frustrated about because there was an extreme amount of exaggeration and outright fabrication about what Luckey actually did here. And that seemed to have built into some of this, what Carmack describes as hysteria that led to this kind of push for his firing. And to be clear, Luckey still maintains, if you look at his response to Bosworth here, that this was a political firing. He said in this tweet, you publicly told everyone my departure had nothing to do with politics, which is absolutely insane and obviously contradicted by realms of internal communications. It's like saying the sky is green. And so
Screams,
just to
screams,
recap
but
just to be clear, let's recap what actually happened here, what Luckey actually did. He funded a billboard for $10,000 that had a picture of Hillary Clinton's face on it that said "too big to jail." The claim that he was funding meme trolling teams on the internet has never been substantiated. There has been no evidence supported by anyone, as far as we know from Blake Harris, the same person who wrote the book "The History of the Future." This was an outright fabrication. It was a rumor that started on Twitter that then somehow became fact because no one bothered to ever do the fact checking. Now, you can describe a poster with a politician's face saying "too big to jail" as real life trolling. You could, but the problem was that this got exaggerated into saying that Luckey was posting racist, xenophobic, sexist, white supremacist memes. And none of that was true. And you can see that he's still very frustrated to this day because that perception directly, clearly, let's be honest here, directly led to his firing. The person who started the Oculus Kickstarter, founded Oculus, and essentially I'm pretty sure the history books will record, brought VR back from the dead. And for him to then, get to this point where just as the Rift is launched and they're then looking into what's next, is it a new PC headset? Is it standalone? Where is this industry going to go next? Just then his own company gets taken away from him. And you can tell that there's still a lot of frustration there, and you can understand that given what's happened here.
Yeah, you step back from everything David just said, right? You read the Blake Harris book, which pretty directly points a finger at Brendan Iribe, and his role in the final decision making. That actually some kind of meeting happened to decide whether Palmer Luckey was going to continue, and based on that book, it seems to point the finger at him. Um, so that's about the end of the trail so far on what happened here. But what I'm saying is, if you step back there a little bit and start viewing the course of people's lives over several years, you can imagine a person exiting Facebook, Palmer Luckey exiting Facebook, angry, um, and frustrated and motivated to do something with his money that he got from a combination of Mark Zuckerberg and the team around him deciding to give him that money. And that forms the basis of that startup, right? His Anduril defense company. And of course, Carmack went and is essentially done the same thing. The thing that's funny about Carmack, if you don't know the history there, he did he worked on Doom and id for many, many years, but then he did Armadillo Aerospace, I think is what it was called, which was a rocketry company that he was trying to do his own thing relative or in competition with Elon Musk and SpaceX, trying to send up rockets. And as I recall his commentary on that, he basically had a set amount of money he could spend on the effort. He spent that amount and then very quickly went into VR to rebuild his war chest. Is the way I view it over the many years. And he built up his war chest at Facebook for many years, and now he's spending that war chest on AI development. And of course, he's building up a team for his startup to build generalized artificial intelligence. There's people in our comments that are like, "Why do we keep talking about these people?" And I value that viewpoint, right? These people are still going to affect the outcome of the industry. They're still notable enough and bend enough years and contribute enough to still have sway, right? And even their money that they have, the literal dollars that they took from Facebook, has sway. And I think that's going back to the core sort of discomfort that people had back in the election then and still to today is, people don't really want the executives at Facebook to be using their money in non-public ways. They think that they should be pretty upfront and public about them. There's a mismatch there in doing things behind the scenes. And ultimately, this is one of the reasons I try to point out little unusual facts about these executives and these people that are important, that like help you understand that they live different lives, they have different goals. They're uh they're doing big things with their dollars that we don't necessarily know about on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we talk about these people a lot is that it's a shame that they're no longer in VR and AR, right? Because what you have here in these two people is a world class engineer and a world class product person, as in not people who are thinking about marketing and cohorts and data driven, mindless, passionless, visionless ideas of what this technology should be, but people who actually understand it from the fundamental first principles, care about it, and have shown the ability to look at where the ball is going instinctually without having to do a bunch of data driven analysis and then find out where the ball might have gone in one direction and then try all over again. And that's something that we've constantly talked about at Meta, where you have this constant push for the latest, greatest new thing without this long-term cohesive vision. And I often wonder what would MetaQuest or Oculus, whatever it would be called today, look like if it was still Palmer Luckey and John Carmack at the helm? What decisions would they have made better, and what decisions might they have made worse? It's a very interesting parallel universe to think about.
Yeah, so Sharon, can a brilliant person also be a foul human? Very hard question. I think the answer to that in abstract is yes. The question is, um, are these people foul humans? I don't think that's a fair question to ask right now of any of these particular faces up here in this particular context. We have to go wider than that to start asking those questions and understanding what their role is over the span of 30, 40, 50 years. One of the questions I have for Carmack, right? If he's discussed pushing AI in a locker. I think that's one of his tweets. And that's a really strange, like I always wonder about artificial generalized intelligence. When do we exactly call it a living being? When do we call it alive? When do we assume it has intent of its own? Uh, Carmack has as good a chance at any, in my mind, of building something like that that you could arguably say thinks for itself. Whether he kills that thing and builds a million more before his next cycle is up to him. It's completely his technology, and it's him to decide whether he's Frankenstein or whether he's God to those people or those things that he creates. That's literally the type of technology he's building, David. Like, do you think of that when you think of what Carmack's building?
Yeah, it is interesting to see the interviews where he's asked about this. It's almost like he's an anti-philosopher. He doesn't even. It's not that he takes the position that it's impossible for intelligence on silicon to be sentient or conscious. It's that he actively doesn't even find the question worth thinking about, which is a really strange position. But I understand that that's always been sort of what Carmack is like. He's not saying, I for X, Y, Z reason believe this can't happen. This question does not even interest me, and that's obviously something that nobody knows. It's possible that it's impossible to know, in the same way that this is obviously getting very philosophical, but there's no experiment you could possibly do to devise whether someone is truly having a first person conscious experience versus whether they just say they are. And that obviously is something that's going to be a huge issue with AGI. And yeah, as you say, it is fascinating that Carmack is kind of taking this very different approach from the rest of the industry, which is the rest of the industry is just throw scale at it, throw massive data centers at it, try to come up with something that doesn't need to be computationally elegant or efficient. Whereas Carmack is saying, right, look, the human brain is running on 20 watts. Clearly, there is a much more simple and low energy cost algorithm for intelligence here, and that's what he's out trying to build. And what's the phrase he uses for himself? The Victorian gentleman scientist approach of just going off in a cabin and undistracted by the world and trying it.
And then, of course, you've got Lucky, right, the defense company, and you have to decide what is where do you draw the line on who you work for, why you work for them, uh, whether you support it, and how you oppose it. And there was uh, big hate and even internal letters over at Microsoft to try to get them to stop doing some of their HoloLens technology for the military. And you've got Magic Leap out here, which is basically principally owned by Saudi Arabia. You can't talk about things at that level, things like technologies owned by Saudi Arabia, uh, in the same context as like, you have to put that reality in the same level as who owns, these cameras and sensors inside of our homes, what can be done with them. Um, it's all very, very heavy, serious discussions about how our future will be shaped at really fundamental levels by these technologies we're putting into our houses. And these people are all wondering about those things. Bosworth, the interesting context I'll give with him, well, a couple bits of interesting context I want to give, right? Um, Carmack. every time at every Oculus Connect I've seen him at, has made himself available more than any other executive ever, uh, in the history of Facebook. Otherwise, you go to if you ever attended one of the Oculus events, you would have found uh, John Carmack in the hallway talking for hours and hours and hours. There are tweets in my history, in my timeline where I watched him on stage, put a headset on, and then have a line of devs form at the stage right, waiting for him to wear their headset and try the game that they've made. And the dev is sitting there watching John Carmack wear the headset and just watching his head movements and trying to deduce exactly what screen John Carmack is in and what problems he's having as he's giving a stream of information about what he's seeing and what he's thinking about what he's seeing. Some of the most valuable moments in the history of some devs' lives probably happened on those stage in those moments where they got to go face to face with this person, right? We have to talk about that in context of like what he's done and what he meant to the community. And Palmer was also at these events, but he was very quickly removed, right? Like he was very quickly removed from the story of Oculus Connect, but he was also there and answering things. And then you have Andrew Bosworth who does these Q&As over on Instagram. And it's very funny to think about the platform shift right there. You've got an accessible engineer, hands-on into the actual technologies that affect uh, everyone, and then you've got someone who only takes questions via Instagram AMA, where he self-selects exactly what he wants to reply to. It's a very
Exactly.
different situation.
It's interesting that it's still called an Ask Me Anything on Instagram when, unlike on Reddit, where that term originated, as far as I'm aware, on Reddit, you can see all the questions. And yes, the replier can choose which they want to reply to, but you can still see all the questions. On Instagram, as you point out very rightly, you only see the questions that Bosworth chooses to answer. So it's ask me anything, but you only get to see what they choose. And coming back to this idea of openness and Q and A's and interviews, I think you kind of glossed over Palmer's one here because I'm sure everyone who's been around in this industry for 10 years and remembers the Oculus Kickstarter and the DK1 and the DK2 and the original Rift remembers Palmer Luckey and Nate Mitchell's numerous interviews. It was always something that people looked forward to because it was one of the only experiences in the tech industry where you would get real answers. It wasn't a rehearsed corporate PR line, at least most of the time, with some notable exceptions, such as the Oculus Rift as a seated experience, which was clearly coming from Facebook lawyers. But a lot of the time when it came down to why was this product decision made, what are the trade-offs here, how do you see this going in the future, it wasn't this carefully rehearsed Bosworth like line that sounds like it at times comes out of a marketing 101 class. It was an actual description of what the product decisions were. That's why I keep calling Palmer a product person. It was clear that he wasn't just setting an overall strategy and letting a bunch of subordinates to him go and figure it out, and that he would never really kind of get down into detail of. Palmer was actually involved in those product decisions, and that's something that I think it wasn't even that. It was that he was the face of the company as well, right? One of the things that really helped Apple over its ascendance after Jobs' return was just how good Steve Jobs was at communicating the product, the actual decisions that were made, the trade offs, the way it fit into your life. And that's a lot of the time when I saw Palmer speak, I was reminded of that in a way that I just don't think Mark Zuckerberg is doing, because it's not Andrew Bosworth who's actually the face of Quest today. It's Zuckerberg, right? When you get a new Quest feature, a lot of the time it's announced on Zuckerberg's Instagram channel, or he's the one giving a piece to camera talking about the pass through and comparing it to Vision Pro, or he's the one in a video showing you mixed reality or kind of playing a multiplayer game. Zuckerberg has been really adamant to make himself the face, but I just don't think that's his strength, is communicating this in a kind of level, easily understandable, product focused way. And that's one of the things that Luckey just really did well.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is the moment to get into this, but I guess I'll talk about this idea again of just who really believes in this technology, and who kind of just sees it as part of a cool thing that is going to be something else, right? Like I have been asked this question by many, many people: why VR? And I had this question over the weekend thrown at me, where it's like, what is AI relative to VR? And of course, we can all look at that and see it as a major component of VR and what these headsets give us, but this fundamental idea of collapsing space and bringing you and I across the Atlantic into this room together is why we do what we do. It's fundamentally like it's not a magic trick anymore. It's actually a part of our lives. And these people all helped turn that from from a magic trick or an idea into something we fundamentally can do. Now, we're going to do really weird things with it on an ongoing basis, and we're gonna start judging these people because of the things we do with the technology they just gave us. Like, it's not going to be a like, these people are concerned with how the history books remember them, at the same time that they're concerned with exactly what I just said. How do these headsets get used in the real world with what they've just birthed into the world? We've heard these stories in the past of people regretting these things. It can happen here with VR technology in various ways. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, do you wanna add anything there, David?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as well as their own personal aspects being in the history books, their contributions to the technology are their DNA is in the products today, right? One of the projects that Lucky led at Oculus was the Oculus Touch controllers, including that input scheme that pretty much every VR controller today uses. I often call them touch-like because they are all touch-like. You had this alternative idea of a controller from HTC and Valve with a more wand-like touchpads style, but this touch-like design where you have like a game controller split in half with a grip trigger that is on your middle finger was pretty much architected by Lucky's team, the Super Action project as it was called until it was branded Oculus Touch. Then when it comes to Carmack, it's even more, right? A lot of the fundamental technologies from time warp to how the compositors work to the optimizations needed to get VR running on mobile chipsets were engineered by Carmack. And for better and for worse, some of the decisions that were made back then really helped Meta get to where it was today, and some of them are hindering them relative to newer ideas like how Vision OS approaches the concept of what a VR operating system should be. So yeah, it's fascinating that the decisions that they made back then are so interspersed. And both of these people, interestingly, described the modern headsets we had today a very, very long time ago. One of the things I always like to point out is that you can go back and watch a 2013 interview of John Carmack where he pretty much exactly describes the Oculus Quest, right? This is when there were still duct tape Rift prototypes that where the idea of the Rift was solely of just plugging into your PC. And Carmack was saying, yeah, this is where it is today, but a couple of years down the line, what we're going to have is a headset that has an onboard smartphone chipset that runs an Android based operating system that uses cameras for inside out markerless positional tracking. And then at that point, you could walk around a whole room with positional tracking, and this thing wouldn't need a PC. And the interviewer at the time was just like, whoa, that's pretty crazy. I've never heard anything like that. And then all these years later, 6 years later, you get the Oculus Quest, and that's pretty much the foundation of all of the products we have today.
So, I don't know how to capture these random thoughts. I'm gonna just spit them out at our audience here and see what sticks. But you have an organization that started off at just a couple thousand people, the whole Facebook organization. When this VR thing appears like it could be ready for prime time to Zuckerberg. There's a lot of little details of Zuckerberg going and visiting Stanford and checking out what they have in their best studios before coming back and actually pulling the trigger, so to speak, on buying Oculus. It seems like he looked around and saw what the status was and then made his selection. And then there was, of course, the reported, like I've done my own reporting on this and it's been out there, but uh, Oculus at the time put Zuckerberg inside of what was effectively the Valve room, the room installed by Valve at Oculus headquarters. And then, as this acquisition occurred, a bunch of Valve people jumped ship, left Valve, and then went over to Oculus. And then, of course, Valve still showed up and shipped a headset in competition with what just happened, right? Half your team all working in VR walks away to the competitor or someone else building the ship, and you still ship your headset and you still get Valve ready and you still like get there with features like hand controllers and room scale first. Like it's such a big deal that Valve still did what it did despite all of those people going over and joining Oculus. It's one of those mysteries in we don't have a lot of details about what it was like inside Valve in those days because Valve is still shipping, right? Like they're still
Yeah.
working in secret, building for that big day when they can say, look what we've been working on.
Yeah, well, that was the advantage of HTC. HTC is often talked about as this kind of dead weight partner, or that they didn't do anything. But the reason Valve chose HTC is that HTC at the time was a leading smartphone company, and one of the things they did really, really well was going from design prototype to mass production in an incredibly short time, way faster than many of its competitors, faster than the likes of Nokia, faster than any of the American tech companies could go from prototype to mass production. And that's one of the advantages. One of the reasons behind that is the advantages of being in Taiwan. HTC is a Taiwanese company. They're so near the supply chain. They are speaking the same language as the supply chain. They have all of that in a much sort of lower iteration time. It's one of the reasons that Chinese companies today, like Xiaomi and Huawei, can often innovate faster than the Western tech companies. Again, it's just that advantage of being near the supply chain. Valve was very clever to choose HTC as the original partner, and you can say a lot about how after that original launch, HTC became more of a burden than a benefit. But when it came to going from an oh shit, half of our team and some of our key players just got hired by Oculus and they're going to build something that may cut out steam. We need to get a competitor out there fast. HTC was absolutely the right choice, and Valve made a very clever move to do that instead of doing it internally. Had Valve tried to do it internally, I think we could have seen the Rift launch years before Valve's competitor.
So the the bit I want to push back on here, the last bit of this conversation with these people in the mix that I want to get to is um we're in the middle of a phase of Apple shipping what they argue is like they've got a new operating system, Vision OS, that is shipping from Apple. We heard stories about an operating system developed internally at Meta. We understand that they probably need to have an operating system to run their AR ambitions over the long term. And then we have this Quest OS that is a fork of Android. It's Android underneath. And day in and day out, our users, our most of our audience out there are going to be Quest owners. We're literally wearing Quests right now. And we've got all these frustrations with the user interface, and we're seeing all these hints of them upgrading and really getting some big new things into the operating system that should have been there from the start but weren't. But what I'm trying to understand is you've got this console operating system and it's starting to talk to other devices more and more. It's been able to talk to the PC for a while for PC VR, but we need other things like gamepads and mice and keyboards, other devices all brought into this operating
Well,
system or
they're
brought
they're
into
already
this
all supported.
experience. Sorry, what was that?
You can use a gamepad and a mouse and a keyboard on a Quest today.
Sure, yes, and they're all getting added. I mean, like, they're there, and the functionality is getting better with each couple releases, like, they're making this more robust. But the multitasking question that you and I always come back to, you've demonstrated it multiple times on this show, where you can technically multitask in here and pull up a browser and your arms go limp. That that functionality you're seeing live on this show when he goes into the menu system is the thing that Apple is getting out of the box right with all of these apps floating around you at all times. how over the next 2 years, what what becomes apparent about the architecture of Quest OS that restricts what Meta can do or allows them to do things completely different that Apple doesn't do because they're integrated all across the board. And then a few years later, how does that affect everyone who bought things? So, like, if you go and partner with LG, and then that partnership dries up 3 years later, does that mess up any of your entitlements? Does that make any of your things not work 3, 4 years down the road? Those are questions Meta has to answer as they go and partner with multiple people. Apple doesn't necessarily have to answer the questions in the same way. And how does that affect your end experience? Like, is it a pain in the butt to multitask on Quest headsets? And it is all like, is it ever going to match what the experience is over on Apple?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a huge focus for Meta in coming years. They're going to want to dramatically improve what the Quest can do as a general computing device. They've already focused heavily on gaming and fitness, which is very much, they're both very much so focused single app experiences, but they need a story around that. And at Connect, we saw Augment being announced. That sounds like it's going to be the equivalent of Apple's shared space. It's interesting that one of the biggest, what's the word, the opposite of proponent, my mind's gone blank, the biggest enemies of the XROS project at Meta was John Carmack. Carmack was very adamant that this can all be built on top of Android, that the engineering time of building an entirely new custom OS would be a nightmare, and that it would actually set back the company's ambitions by years and years. And Carmack was one of the biggest voices against XROS. So if Carmack's to be believed, Meta can eventually get Android, its fork of Android, Quest OS, built out to have all of this functionality. And we know from Bosworth recently that multitasking for 2D apps is something that they're going to focus heavily on, because you can already kind of do it, right? You can open an Android app here and a web browser here and another Android app here on your Quest, but they're all locked in this specific configuration. It's not like Vision OS where you can place them wherever you want. And of course, the real issue is when you want an app that does anything 3D, anything at all, even just showing a single 3D model, it then becomes a full space app in Apple's terminology, and it takes over your headset completely. And that's a completely separate world to the home space. And with Augment, Meta is clearly going to try and bring that same solution to Quest OS, but instead of being independent Android apps, these are going to be, JavaScript applets from what we've seen, and they're going to be developed, in Spark AR, Meta's own kind of engine that's used for Instagram filters, and it's going to be built out to the point where you're not able to use the features of Unity and Unreal. It's going to be very, very interesting to see a year's time from now how do shared space Vision OS apps compare to Quest 3 augments. One of the things that Meta is going to have on its advantage by having JavaScript is that you get that massive, massive ecosystem of libraries and support, and that any device you can build this on. If you want to build a Vision Pro app, you need a Mac, you need an Apple developer license, you need to go and learn Apple's own programming language, Swift, and its own proprietary reality kit and AR kit. If you want to build something that runs really well in the shared space, that's not something that you'll have to do on the Meta side. If any web developer that's familiar with JavaScript can come in and build that, it's one of those things where we can't say too much until we see what Augments looks like. But I imagine that over the coming year, Meta is going to have much more focus into Augments than it does into native apps, and try to build out that same experience as the multitasking on Vision OS. Because as you said, it is the greatest thing about Vision Pro. The experience of using Vision OS in the shared space feels light years ahead of anything that any other headset has presented, except for perhaps Magic Leap.
So, yeah. So let me close out with some just broad thoughts here on these guys on this story here, right? Oculus got bought by Facebook for $2 to $3 billion, and it made these people rich, and they all aligned on this idea of making a game console as the bridge to the next platform, and they all got on board with this idea of let's get games made for the thing. So first they tried out a bunch of PC games and they realized that wasn't going to work for them. And then they funded just heaps and heaps and heaps of these standalone games for the Quest ecosystem. Um, Not until Apple has really shipped have we really seen what a PC or a computer looks like in VR, and we wonder what Valve will do when it comes to what does a PC look like in VR, a whole PC. How robust is it in what you can do with that sort of system? Um, what I'm going with this is that the seeds that these people laid in going for a console-based gaming system first, we're gonna find out whether that was the right strategy in the next 2 to 5 years, and there's gonna be infighting or disagreements pointing at different people here on who was responsible and backing specific decisions that either led to this company dominating or led to them being a couple years behind the curve when it comes to a couple key decisions.
Yeah, for sure. So one comment I want to read out here from RAR2377, because we always want to get the alternative view, is they're saying no frustrations for the operating system. You just like to hate on Oculus. And I find that very funny because one of the reasons I think that we do really well when it comes to being balanced and biased is that one week you'll get people saying, you just hate Meta and you're so biased against Meta. And then the next week you'll get someone saying, God, UploadVR, you're just so pro Meta and you're always, supporting Meta. And that's how I think, you're doing well in balance when you have completely opposite accusations of bias that clearly cannot simultaneously be true. The reality is, look, we like to discuss these things honestly and give you our genuine take. And we often talk about the advantages of Quest hardware and its content, and you'll find that in certain discussions. And there are other times we will point out the disadvantages of Quest's approach and strategy and content in OS. We're not we don't like to hate on anyone. We like to genuinely talk about our views. And here we have Jack B saying, I think you hate
Yeah.
PC VR. Have you ever considered potentially we don't randomly have some predisposition to hate certain types of VR? It's possible that we're actually just giving you our genuine takes as people who have been in this industry for over 10 years and used all of these headsets for thousands of hours and spoken to dozens of developers, hundreds of developers, and
Hundreds,
hundreds of
yeah.
users and done hundreds and dozens of demos. We're actually being genuine. We're not deciding to randomly hit anything.
Yeah, I really appreciate that pushback on David's part, and PCVR is one of the coolest things I've ever done, right? Like nothing will ever take City 17 away from us. Nothing will ever take that beautiful scene at the opening of Half-Life Alyx away from anyone who's experienced it. And the thing that I think so much, like one of the things that's missing in our videos that we put on the channel, like I have a video of me going into that scene with the Joy-Cons, and you tease me about it because we have to make clear that it's a terrible game. You cannot play the game that way. But the thing that is so breathtaking about that world, that scene in Half-Life Alyx, that opening moment, is it's so beautiful. It's just a beautiful place to see. You don't have to actually do anything there to just look around and take in the surroundings. And there's something special in the lighting, the textures, everything that was done with PC power to make that experience like happen. And it's we understand that that is a foundational reason why everyone loves their avatars in VR chat too, right? So shut
Yeah.
up, you're wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say I use PC VR all the time. I'm a huge fan of simulators. I would never go back to playing Flight Simulator on a monitor, nor Elite Dangerous, nor a racing sim. Uh, do I also like playing a standalone game like Ultra Wings occasionally if I'm on the go? Sure, or Warplanes, but it's not the same thing as being in a PC Flight Simulator, DCS, Flight Simulator, Elite Dangerous. That is a level that is just never going to come to a standalone headset anytime remotely soon. It's just not going to happen. And yeah, I saw someone else saying, no, we just hit Sony. Uh, yeah, again, I think people are just joking or throwing names at the
And
wall at this point.
right, yeah, and I'm sitting here like figuring out when can I plug in my PSVR 2 into the PC, and I'm making them both mad, right? Like both groups mad by just trying to plug in the headset to the port that's on the back of my PC. Like it's just ridiculous. You guys, the one of the things that we have to push back on our show is uh I think the algorithms and the conversations that they've chosen for you to see have warped some brains and made them expect us to be something that we are not when they get here. So our commenters are level-headed. I've seen the commenters push back and provide simple information for people. What the open source Android project, I saw them calling out that acronym for people that need to know what that is. That's the kind of culture we're trying to build here, the kind of helpful atmosphere of you can disagree with me, you can still be respectful about it, and that's the way we're going to reach the core of this info.
Yeah, and as I just keep saying, thank you, Bluebell, for saying I think you guys are informed and not biased. We are not. We have never ever put out an article or review on this show that is designed to get attention or clicks or be controversial. What we are saying is genuine. You can 100% disagree with us on certain topics, but you just need to realize that we're genuinely telling you what we actually think as people that have been in the industry for 10 years. Are we ready to talk about this final topic, Pimax?
Yeah, I think I'll leave that last note. Amanda Watson also had a very interesting uh, tweet that she put out there that we included in our write up of the whole incident. Amanda Watson obviously shipped Citra VR over at the beginning of the year with a big sort of bang there at the beginning of the year, announcing Citra VR at CES, and then getting that out as an emulator. And that's been the story of a lot of this year has been emulation in VR headsets. That's multiple articles I'm trying to get out there. But that comment from Amanda Watson was very, very interesting, more or less defending John Carmack and uh, his work ethic as well as his overall effort to back Palmer Luckey during that whole incident. But I think that was just really interesting. I wanted to mention that name. Look for more content from us very soon related to emulators and related to Amanda Watson.
Yeah, so Virtual Desktops developer Guy Godin in our comments saying, speaking of hating a company, let's switch to Pimax. It's quite a funny segment.
I who said it? Who gets it? Who gets credit for it? That's yeah, Guy. Thank you. All right, we're sorry. We're sorry. You found us out. Yeah, I have to talk to Don Hopper later. We'll have to see what Don thought of that segue. Yeah, let's talk about Pimax here, David.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the sort of general company stuff and the negative stuff because, we want to start by caveating this all with the fact that Pimax has a long history of repeatedly missing its shipping deadlines, of delivering products that are incomplete or don't meet what was promised. And that is absolutely true. For years, this is a consistent thing. So we do always recommend caution when it comes to Pimax's announcements and their claims. There are products that they announced 3 years ago that have not shipped, for example, and certain products that they do release that just don't have features until firmware updates months down the line. And so what we were actually heavily criticized back in the day for pointing out that there were a lot of red flags about Pimax. I remember there was this time where we were saying, hang on, the specs that they're claiming here are ridiculous. This is clearly not going to work out the way it's being presented. And I think now it's pretty much the consensus view that we were very much so we were right on that, right? This was not some random vendetta we had, like, to come back to this trend against Pimax. We didn't just say, you know what, I don't like the name of that company. Let's just be dicks to them. That's not. We were seeing real red flags, and those have very much so panned out over the time. All that said, when I saw this announcement, the Crystal Light, and to a lesser degree, but still to some degree, the Crystal Super, for the very first time in a very long time, I said to myself, this looks like a clever move from Pimax. This looks like they're finally learning some lessons about what to focus on and how big to aim for a company their size and what to try and prioritize. And I'm actually cautiously optimistic about Crystal Light, which is a first for a Pimax product in a long time for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I do appreciate people saying that the name is weird. I don't. What is this trend of of making it seem like a drug experience to go online? Like I'm gonna meet you in VR chat on Crystal. I'm gonna go in tweet at you on X. That's kind of the way people are arriving at their internet experience. I wonder if that's gonna, like, linguistically keep up, right? We've come a long way from cyberspace to doing drugs on the internet. But yeah, I don't quite like the name there. What specifically about this device, like, sells you on the concept here other than other things that they've done? Like the Pimax portal was an interesting idea, but remember that one was like I walked up to it at the show conference and it didn't do any of the things that they really said it was ready to do at that time.
Okay, so I'll explain this. It'll take a little time, but I'll explain it. So the Pimax crystal that came out last year, it started shipping about a year ago. Essentially, this is a very strange product because it's primarily marketed towards PC gamers, but it's a hybrid headset in that it has a standalone XR2 chipset on board and a battery so that it can also be a standalone headset. However, what it can't do is currently be a wireless PC headset. There's no AirLink on this. There's no Steam Link. There's no virtual desktop. This thing either acts as a native DisplayPort headset where the chipset and the battery are just dead weight and dead cost, or it acts as a standalone headset, except the Pimax store has a comically small number of standalone titles, and its system software is absolutely nothing compared to Quest and Pico. The standalone aspect of this, in my opinion, was a big misstep and an afterthought and a silly strategy from Pimax, especially when the vast majority of their customers were and are PC gamers who wanted a PC headset. So what they have done, well, the advantage first, let's talk about, of Crystal was that it has these 3K per eye LCD displays. And in comparison, Quest 3 has 2K per eye. So with this headset, you get a higher resolution system, but it's $1,600. And part of the reason for that is that it has this standalone computing hardware on board. So what is Crystal Light? With Crystal Light, they have taken out the standalone chipset and taken out the battery and taken out eye tracking. And by taking out these three elements, you get a headset that is lighter and cheaper while still having 3K per eye displays. And so the regular Crystal, this headset that's been around for a year, this hybrid headset, is $1,600. But the Crystal Light, which again takes out the chipset, the battery, and the eye tracking, is $700. Now, there is one key difference between them in that the display on the base model of Crystal Light does not have mini LED backlighting, so it doesn't have local dimming. However, they're also offering a $900 model that does have the mini LED backlighting and local dimming. Now, simultaneously, they're also releasing later this year, they claim, a Crystal Super. Crystal Super also does not have the standalone stuff. It doesn't have a chipset. It doesn't have a battery. Crystal Light and Crystal Super are wired only, PC only headsets. But Crystal Super does keep the eye tracking and upgrades the 3K displays to 4K per eye displays. And that also comes in two models, an $1,800 model that has QD-LCD displays with local dimming, and a $2,000 model that they claim will have micro OLED displays, OLED micro displays. So essentially you're getting, in the Crystal Super, Vision Pro-like displays, but with eye tracking so it can actually support foveated rendering on PC. Now, the Crystal Super, it's interesting if you're someone that is willing to pay that kind of money, $1,800, $2,000. But for me, what's really interesting here is the Crystal Light, because this looks like Pimax finally, instead of trying to throw the kitchen sink at their products and put everything everyone could possibly want and then fail to deliver, they're finally focusing. They're doing less, not more. They're saying, this Crystal Light, it's just a simple PC headset. It's a DisplayPort connection, no chip, some 3K displays, and some nice lenses. And for $200 more, some local dimming too. So at $700, $200 more than the Quest 3, you get a headset that doesn't have compression. You don't have to deal with USB or Wi-Fi issues. You just plug it into your PC. And I think the real kind of use case for this, the potential market, is sim racers, right? If you want something that is higher resolution than Quest 3, that doesn't have to go through compression and you don't have to worry about a battery life, you don't have to get an Elite strap or anything, this is what this becomes useful for. And unlike things like the big screen Beyond and Steam VR headsets, this has inside-out tracking built in. It comes with track controllers. As far as I'm aware, the controller tracking of Pimax is still not up to the quality of something like Quest. So again, I still think that the core focus of this is going to be for sim racers. It's $200 more than Quest 3 for significantly and noticeably higher resolution.
I wanted to see we've got first I want to call out Guy's comment here. Geez Louise, that's a lot of headsets. Yeah, I turned off my brain about halfway through your rundown, David, because it was too many headsets. And maybe that's unfair to Pimax to have done that, to not have a long enough attention span to remember the names of all the different headsets they just promised that they're going to try to get out by the end of the year. But that is that is the situation. And then I saw Gamertag VR joining us, and I wanted to call out Gamertag's tweet quite recently out there in public. I thought it was interesting. Currently being refused early access to a game coming out this week. I want to review in case I say something negative. Such a shame it's come to this. Yeah, interesting comment, and appreciate the work out there to push back at that. I thought it's worth kind of amplifying that here on the show, and I just retweeted it over on Twitter. And I seemed valuable to bring or call out that comment because it's a similar thing to sort of the criticism we were encountering earlier in the show. You know, who are we not fair to? Uh, is kind of a problem across this industry. You want you want an audience that wants the true opinions of the people that are in front of them, and I think that's what Gamertag there is going for, just like we are.
Yeah, and somewhat relevantly, Pimax has repeatedly refused to provide us with review headsets. I think they've, in the long-term past, this may be very different, have kind of given hints that they are only expecting good reviews. I'm not going to say anything about some of the people that do get review units from Pimax, but I do think they focus on the people that they know are not going to cause a fuss, and they are not the kind of company that is actively looking for honest reviews of their hardware. That said, at $700, I'm sure that I'll either get a Crystal Light to see what it's like, or borrow somebody's
You
that
could
has
buy
it
it off a
to review.
YouTuber. Yeah.
Yeah, do the classic buy it for a week and return it style.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I again, we have someone in the comments here saying that they would totally use this. Snail Mill Games says I would play DCS or IL2 with this. Just saying, and I completely agree. I do think this is one of those things where, like, if you are someone who you want a VR headset for sim racing or flight simulators or Elite Dangerous, and you don't really care about room scale gaming with track controllers, that's not your thing. You don't care about standalone, you don't care about wireless. You just want something to either replace or act as an alternative to your triple monitor setup. This is going to be a really interesting headset, assuming there isn't some crazy design flaw, because this is the first time where, instead of Pimax is trying to do more, they're trying to do less. And that's it's clever. That's what I've been asking them to do the whole time, to be more realistic, to realize that they are not the size of company that can try to pull off the best. Try to just do something that's at a decent price, that offers a niche that the other companies aren't doing, right? Nobody else is building a decently high resolution, PC only, native DisplayPort headset for $700. It's not something anyone's that has inside out tracking. It's a lot. There are people that are building PC headsets that require base stations. There are people that are building PC headsets that are $2,000, but at $700, this is big. I mean, that's a really good price for what they're offering here.
I just I'm trying to imagine the customer here looking at this chart, right? And they're like, do I get this one? But wait, it's got this and all the $300 here. That's the cost of a Quest 2 right now. I can't. I don't know how this chart computes for the vast majority of people.
To be clear, I still think Crystal's a silly product, right? I still think that the idea that they would take a PC headset and then add a chipset and a battery that never actually gets used until years later when they come up with a $300 adapter, that's silly. I don't think this is a sensible product. This one in the middle, but I do think this one is, and I think also if, like we were talking the other day about how great it would be to have Vision Pro's displays on PC with eye tracked foveated rendering. Well, here it is for $2,000 for $1,500 less than the Vision Pro. If someone just wants that level of display, those gorgeous 4K micro OLEDs that we praise in Vision Pro, but can never be used on PC at full resolution because Apple does not give developers eye tracking. So ALVR can't use eye tracking. Virtual Desktop, when they release their Vision Pro, they can't use eye tracking. They can never have foveated rendering, but this will. So again, assuming there's no crazy design flaw, I think going back to their roots and not trying to be crazy is a good solution. And talking about things where they were overly ambitious, I hinted at the start, their Pimax 12K reality headset that they announced back in 2021 has still yet to ship. I can only assume it's been cancelled, but it was supposed to have ridiculous specs. They wanted this thing to be standalone PC, wireless, 6K per eye, 200 degrees field of view, inside out body tracking, completely absurd and insane. And we pointed out at the time, maybe that they're finally learning with the Crystal Light that they should try and aim for realistic products. But you know what? I have a really funny feeling that 2 months down the line, before this one ships, they're going to come out and announce something else and do it all over again.
Yeah, it's I also like let's visor. We need to still put the visor on our head, but it was tough to see kind of the visor do a similar sort of thing where like let's announce something with a bunch of specs and then can the ones that actually aren't pre-ordered as much. And it very much feels like a real time sort of A/B testing on their customers, and I always wonder that with Pimax. There was a comment there from Gamertag, saying that where was it? I got a Pimax. I can't remember the name of it, but ultimately it was an effort to want to wear to the size due to the size and weight. It was an effort to want to wear. I love that. That's a beautiful phrasing for the difficulty of VR headsets in general.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially when it comes to these Pimax headsets. So the reason they kind of look like this is that Pimax's original focus was on delivering a really, really wide field of view. That was originally their distinguisher with their 8K and 5K line of products. They weren't actually 8K or 5K. That's just what they were called, to be clear. But they had this kind of hammerhead design to accommodate that. But now with the Crystal in recent years, Pimax has switched their focus from ultra wide field of view down to a little wider than modern headsets, but with resolution higher. That's been their real focus in recent years, to try to deliver these 3K displays, and that's where the name Crystal obviously comes from, crystal clear. But they've still kept this same hammerhead like design, this same now kind of iconic, I guess, within the industry design. One of the things is that Gamertag is pointed out in the comments, they're talking about the Crystal, the one that has the battery and chipset on board. Pimax claims that the Crystal Light and Super are 250 grams lighter than the Crystal, and they claim that that's because it doesn't have a chipset, it doesn't have a battery, and it doesn't have any cooling fan. Right, all of that computing hardware that needs to be done for a standalone headset that they had in Crystal for 5 standalone games that no one's ever going to actually play, they've taken out for the Crystal Light. And that's what I think is clever, right? They're doing less, not more. I keep saying it over and over again, but it really is because I'm finally pleased to see Pimax make sensible decisions.
Yeah, the when you've got something that has the extra field of view, it's heartbreaking to have been in VR for this long and to have what the 99% of the VR headsets on the market would all have the same field of view roughly, right? Like the same, give or take, maybe 10, 15 degrees. And then you've got one company out there in the weeds doing completely different, giving you a completely different field of view, a widely different experience. And they have had such a problem retaining customer support. Like that was the thing James brought up, was this lackluster sense of being able to call someone up and get your problem fixed. We have many, many reports in our inbox over the years of people frustrated with Pimax support.
Yeah, that is obviously another thing that we've reported on before, that you really have to have a buyer beware attitude. Sometimes here you're not going to get the same support as if you went out and got a headset from Meta or Valve or a larger company like that. This is a very different um, situation. So Pimax claims that the Crystal Light is going to ship next month, and they claim that the Crystal Super is going to ship at the end of the year. I would be skeptical about both of those claims, and I strongly recommend do not pre-order these things. Do not pre-order these things. Wait for reviews of the final hardware, not influencers trying an early version, especially not influencers that are historically linked to Pimax. Wait for real reviews of the final consumer hardware on a real PC, not a trade
Final
show
consumer
demo.
hardware. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
final consumer hardware. There's literally been debate over what that is when it comes to this company. So we can only stress waiting for multiple reviews, even because you know you're going to hear that it's you could even hear that it's final hardware when it isn't really. So it's almost like one of these things where you have to wait. And gamertag out there echoing David at the same time that, David is making this recommendation of do not buy until you've got reports, which I think is completely fair consumer advice. At the same time that David said the same thing that gamertag is saying in there, that I think the new Crystal Light is actually Pimax's first shot at a decent PCVR headset I would like to test more than any other headset they've made. That's, it's this is what balance looks like, folks. This is trying to get everything
Yeah.
out there about this company.
It's promising. The one thing that I've seen our commenters kind of frustrated at, though, is that they have taken out the eye tracking for the Crystal Light. So if you do want eye tracking, you have to either go to this heavy crystal, and then you're going more than double the price anyway, or you have to go all the way up to the Crystal Super. It would have been very interesting to see $1,000 or $1,200 model of the Crystal Light that does have eye tracking. I imagine that's a simple upselling tactic. They know that if you want eye tracking, they want you to go and buy their more expensive hardware. It's possible they're not making a huge profit on this Crystal Light, and that it's more of a let's get our name out there, right? Because I noticed in their presentation they showed the Steam hardware survey, and it like Pimax wasn't listed because they only showed like the first 15 headsets. So someone at the company must have gone, to me, that's a hint of we want to be on the Steam hardware survey, right? We want a Pimax headset up there. And I really do think Crystal Light is the first one with the potential to actually start ranking up there, not way, way down in the, 0 point whatever, almost also RANs, but maybe like eighth or something like that. And maybe even more over time. Who knows?
This is my VR chat. This is my VR chat can. My big screen beyond in a can, right? I I think it's going to be interesting. I'm pulling out the big screen beyond here out of the can. Yeah, I love that it actually works to show that off a little with pantomime. This this is pretty like what we see happening over with big screen and like they've got a busy Discord group where they are really trying to work out the mechanics of how do you ship this super super slim PCVR headset and not have, issues. Not how do you scan faces at scale, get headsets out to them that actually fit those faces, and then have, keep those headsets going and make it profitable. Big Screen is working really really hard at this, and they're uh trying to have this communicative loop with their users. And I gotta call that out right here that we have seen Big Screen make it onto the Steam survey, right? Like they are working their way onto it.
Yeah, it's still very, very niche though, right? And that the issue there is that it's $1,000 and it requires base stations and controllers. And whereas a huge advantage of the Crystal Light here is that for $300 less, it's got inside out tracking and it comes with controllers, right? It's a very, very different level of market, and it's higher resolution, though of course it's not OLED. And some of our commenters here are asking about the QD LCD and what the distinction is there from OLED. So unless you have anything else to add, I can kind of go over that briefly.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one of the comments here was asking, what is QD-LCD? Is that going to get decent blacks? Is this maybe what we'll see in Quest 4? So most of you will probably be aware that the two fundamental display types today are LCD and OLED, and all of the marketing names you hear like QLED and LED and blah, 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 they're all just variants of LCD normally. So QD refers to quantum dots, right? With LCD, the variants are all about adding things. So you add a quantum dot layer in front of the LCD and you get a wider color gamut. You get better, punchier colors. So this QD LCD you see here in a crystal light, you're going to get better colors than what you get in something like a Quest 3. Now, this other addition is mini LED backlighting, which delivers local dimming, where instead of like on a Quest 3 or a Quest 2, where you just have a couple of large LED backlights that illuminate the entire display, you instead have maybe 500 or 1,000 small LEDs behind the LCD that can illuminate different parts of the display. So it's not all the way to OLED. With OLED, each pixel is color and light. So on the pixel level, you can control the level of lighting. So with OLED, you can have something really, really bright over here and something really, really dark over here and get infinite contrast. With local dimming delivered through mini LED, you get something that's close to that, right? You can have a bright segment of the display, but you still are going to get a little bit of blooming because the resolution of the light, the backlight, is a lot lower than the resolution of the color pixels, right? You have millions of color pixels and maybe 500 or 1,000 light pixels, but it gets you about halfway overall from between LCD and OLED. And QD LCD with local dimming is exactly what Quest Pro had, right? They'd had LCD displays with a quantum dot layer and mini LED backlighting. It's the same kind of display in crystal light and crystal that you're seeing in Quest Pro. The only difference is with this $700 model, the cheaper one, you don't get the backlighting. You still have a regular old backlight, but you still get the punchier colors. So if you wanted to play something like Elite Dangerous, I would very much so recommend going for the $900 model if you want to get a lot darker segments. You want to show space as not this washed out gray. The one thing that the LCDs just really, really suck at is things like space games. But with the Crystal Super, they do have this $2,000 model that uses micro OLED. And micro OLED compared to regular OLED, these are just like different ways of manufacturing. Where with micro OLED, you can get much, much smaller, more dense pixels manufactured directly onto silicon. And it's still like regular OLED, you get that infinite contrast because each pixel is color and light. As to what we'll have in Quest 4, it's a really, really interesting question. I think at minimum, Meta will probably want to push to get um, QD LCD with local dimming, as that is coming down in cost over time. Uh, but it depends on how long it takes Quest 4 to come out. It's somewhat possible that we could see maybe like a 2.5K or 3K OLED micro display in Quest 4. It's really going to depend on how the supply chain gets built out.
Yeah, it is one of the things that is happening through the course of this year. It's almost, it's a behind the scenes scene setting thing that is happening where the factories are getting built in real time as we speak to ship the devices that these headset makers are going to want or need 2 or 3 years from now. So it's the biggest cost. David has been phenomenal at nailing down information about the supply chain of displays, and Apple actually kind of surprised people quite a bit with the resolution and the choice of display inside of it. And what we're seeing now is, we even saw Mark Zuckerberg himself talk about that design choice being a big one, right? Like these choices of what display they put in these headsets determines what kind of content is enjoyable in that headset. And I'm seeing even in our comments people talking about Sims and stuff like when we've got a video coming up here from Don Hopper looking at MetaCity over on App Lab. And also we had him look at Lo-Fi over on PC. And we internally, David and I, are discussing like what is the difference for users between these two experiences, right? They're both flying cars, getting you into that experience of feeling like you're in a flying car, but are you gonna deny the person the $5 flying car experience because the $35 flying car experience that requires a $1,000 PC is just that much prettier? No, the $5 flying car experience is pretty cool too, and that's the kind of balance that we have to always deal with here. At the same time that, the people in our audience, we wanna respect the ones that are going out and, like, buying a Quest and then waiting for the right graphics card to come along to then go and buy the PC to upgrade and have, you could have the city experience in standalone flying over the city, and then boom, plug in your PC, stream it wirelessly, and then enjoy the much more robust experience over on PC. That's a beautiful path that we wanna see a lot more people continue to do over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. We're getting a few questions here as to whether we plan to review Crystal Light or Crystal Super. Just to reiterate, Pimax does not provide us with review units, and it's very hard to justify spending the kind of money that Pimax headsets go for to review a headset that is relatively niche. I think Crystal Light, given its potentially wider appeal, becomes something that we would then consider, borrowing for someone or, maybe renting or something to review. That's something that we'll have to figure out. It's just, as I was saying, it's difficult to justify spending that kind of money for something that's niche like that.
If
Hopefully, Pimax decides that, they really do want a trusted outlet like UploadVR to review their headset. If you're from Pimax and listening, or you work at Pimax, please send us a headset. We will be fair. We will review it with an objective eye to what the hardware's properties are, what the experience of using it is like, and what kind of value it provides. And I think, that's what people want. There's a lot of people who aren't going to buy your product if they don't see trusted reviewers explain its advantages and disadvantages. So I don't actually think, again, if anyone's from Pimax is listening, that you're going to gain anything by blocking out certain outlets from like
and
Upload from reviewing. In fact, you're going to have a loss from it.
And I don't know, like, we deal with this on the software side of things, where it's a very sensitive subject to deal with devs on. We're dealing with it day in and day out, right? Devs have 1 day to release their product on the storefront. They get one launch day, and that's the day that the platform gives them a big boost. It's the day when a bunch of media outlets compete to be the the place of record regarding their product, and then that day passes, and you could have a team of 1, you could have a team of 50. If that day 1 launch didn't get you enough downloads, you don't necessarily like, everything else of your plans may have to be scrapped and thrown away because you just didn't have a big enough first day. Well, you know, hardware companies have the same kind of situation. I gave that balanced view of Big Screen Beyond, right? Big Screen Beyond sent me 2 headsets. They sent me 1 headset, and then, while in the review period getting ready to assess, they're like, "Actually, no, uh, we need to it's just easier for us to send you a second headset than to, get you a firmware update to that first headset, so here's the second one." So I received a second one in the mail, and that's the one I assessed for my review in progress. And even doing that review in progress was problematic because they didn't have uh, their lenses, their prescription lenses up and running. So it's like these companies are shipping as fast as they possibly can. And historically speaking, when it comes to Pimax, I want to just second everything David said there that we will give it the fairest shake we possibly can. We will put out what we experience with this thing. But there is kind of a reason we don't receive these devices because the tendency is to ship early and ship often and then look at the reviews and update your devices based on the reviews and claim that it wasn't a finished device. I think that's really what's happening in some places, and We just need to call it for what it is. That's not a good, like, it may work in some venues in some ways, but it's also we're speaking to people that really expect us to assess finished hardware, and we only really want to look at finished hardware. So, yes, Pimax, ship us your hardware so we can test it, but don't give us any kind of BS that it was not finished hardware when we actually do that.
Yeah. Unless there's anything else we want to add, I think we can finish it off there. I think we've got through a lot today. Not as many subjects, but we still had a long 2 hour discussion here. A lot of really interesting stuff in the comments, some deep stuff that got into philosophy at times, and the history of the industry, and then back to more current stuff.
Yeah, we appreciate our audience being with us on this journey, understanding the nuance of these conversations, the attempts to tease apart really tricky subjects. And I'm noticing new viewers in our comments almost every week popping in here and going, "Well, this is delightful. This is a little bit different than I'm used to." So that's all of you in our comments are creating that culture, that sort of tone of curiosity and inquisitiveness, and we thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in the future, and let us know if you have anything you want us to cover. Tips at uploadvr.com.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.